Hello and welcome to today's demo, showcasing rSeries and VELOS on-device analytics for quick monitoring and troubleshooting. In the F5OS 1.7 release, we introduced functionality to provide real-time insights into how tenants were using resources such as vCPU, memory, and storage. In the F5OS 1.8 release, we've also added the ability to view tenant resource utilization over a time series. In addition, we've also added the ability to provide both real-time visibility as well as time series visualization to both system resources and network utilization. Our goal is to help present complex information in a useful format so that the F5OS admin can get insights into resource utilization on F5OS and more quickly troubleshoot their rSeries and VELOS devices. In this demo, we'll look at some of these visualizations in greater detail. So the first section I'd like to highlight is the system summary section under the F5OS dashboard. We've also improved the memory utilization representation. You'll note that the memory on the system is represented across the two categories, namely the memory allocated to the system itself and memory allocated to tenants. And we've also added a more detailed storage usage visualization. So this data can be filtered across categories. So if you wanted to drill down and look at the storage utilization across BIG-IP Next tenants running on the rSeries or VELOS system, you can do that. So click on the BIG-IP Next tenant and you'll note that the storage across the BIG-IP Next tenants is listed. Similarly, you can choose to drill down into a second category such as BIG-IP tenants, and the storage for BIG-IP tenants is represented. The next highlight is the ability to visualize what your CPUs are pinned to and to help determine if they're assigned to F5OS or to tenants. These visualizations are aimed at enabling an F5OS admin to more quickly troubleshoot and analyze a situation where they were notified of a hot CPU and require more details. But before we can jump in, let's take a step back to understand the nuances of how CPUs are allocated on the rSeries and VELOS devices. As you can see on the screen, there are differences between how CPU is allocated on the R5K, R10K, R12K, and VELOS, and on the R2K and 4K appliances. So on the R5K, R10K, R12K, and VELOS, you'll note that a CPU can be F5OS dedicated, meaning that it can be used by F5OS only, or that it can be F5OS, meaning that it's currently in use by F5OS, but is available to be used by a tenant, or a CPU can be dedicated to a deployed tenant, or it can be denoted as an F5OS data mover CPU, meaning that it's used by F5OS data movers and cannot be used by F5OS or by tenants. On the R2K and 4K, there is not a concept of F5OS dedicated or F5OS data mover. On these appliances, a CPU can be either F5OS, which means that it's used by F5OS currently, but is available to be used by a tenant. Or a CPU can be F5OS/tenant, meaning that the CPU is shared by the F5OS and the tenant that's running on the R2K and 4K appliances. So now that we understand the nuances of how CPUs allocated on rSeries and VELOS, let's navigate to the CPU section on the F5OS dashboard. The first thing I want you to notice is the horizontal bar chart that represents the overall CPU allocation by category in percentages. As you can see on this rSeries appliance, 63% of the total CPU is allocated to tenants, 9% to F5OS data mover, 9% also to F5OS dedicated, and 19% to F5OS. To determine which CPUs on the rSeries are allocated to these categories, you can hover over the color-coded bar chart, or you can navigate to the right and the CPU numbers are color-coded. So for example, the blue indicates that a CPU is allocated to a tenant. Also, at the bottom, you'll notice that there's a filterable bar charts where you can filter based on either CPUs allocated to tenants or CPUs allocated to F5OS. So in this case, for example, if I click filter by CPUs allocated to F5OS, you'll notice only the CPU numbers populate on here that are associated with F5OS, and then you can hover over the graph to note the percentages in real time. You can note that these numbers vary even during the course of the last 30 seconds. Now, this is extremely valuable information in contrast to previous releases where you had to execute multiple CLI commands and then correlate between the outputs of those CLI commands to determine if you had a hot CPU. And for example, if you wanted to notice if there was a hot CPU on all of the tenants, you had to execute multiple CLI commands and filter the output of those CLI commands. Whereas now you can choose to filter by tenant type, and then you can see if there's a hot CPU and if there's a pattern, and all of that is visually represented on the dashboard. So the next on-device analytics and data visualization highlight that I want to showcase as part of today's demo is the tenant resource visualization. To view this data, navigate to the Tenant Details tab under Tenant Management. You can choose to drill down on a per tenant basis. So let's pick BigIP 1 tenant. So the ability to view the tenant CPU, memory, and disk usage existed in the F5OS 1.7 release. In F5OS 1.8, we're also providing a time series view of these tenant resource visualizations. So going back to our example, if you wanted to, if you had a CPU spike and you knew which tenant a CPU was allocated to, you could then navigate to this section and then get a view of that CPU. So in this case, let's say we saw a spike hypothetically on vCPU 3, and we figured out from the previous sections that this CPU was allocated to BigIP 1 tenant. So you can navigate to this section and then you can view the data for this CPU for the last 8 hours, for the last 7 days, to determine when that spike started. Similarly, for both tenant memory and disk usage, you have the option to visualize this data over an extended period of time, let's say the last 7 days. And then you can hover over the x-axis to determine if a spike occurred and what the specific memory usage is at any given point in time. Same concept applies to disk usage as well. To view the network utilization analytics, navigate to the network details under network settings. At the bottom of this page, you'll see network statistics for all of the rSeries interfaces. You can then optionally choose to drill down into a specific interface. Let's pick interface 1.0 for example, and then either choose to view the current interface utilization statistics or drill down and choose to view the network utilization for a particular interface over time. Let's choose last 7 days. And then when you hover over the graph, you can see the network utilization for a particular interface at a given point in time. This is particularly useful when diagnosing spikes in packets on a specific interface. So to recap, in today's demo, we were able to illustrate with an example use case how you can use on-device analytics to get insights into your tenant, system, and network utilization on your rSeries and VELOS. We'd love to hear from you. Was this functionality and demo useful? Are there other workflows and related functionality you'd like to see in F5OS? Please let us know. Thank you for watching.